morning, Chairman.
Good morning and welcome to this online meeting of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee. My name is Bob Adams and I'm the chairman of this committee. This is a formal public meeting and the audio feed of this meeting is being broadcast via the County Council's website. I would like to welcome members of the public and of the press who are listening and attending to this online. Before we begin, I would like to confirm who is present. Rachel will, Democratic Services Officer, will ask members to indicate their presence after their name is called. When invited to speak, you should unmute your microphones and switch on your video. When you are not participating in the meeting, please make sure you have muted your microphone and switched off your video. I now invite Rachel to do a roll call of members, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I request that when I call out the names, members clearly say present to indicate that they are in attendance? Councillor Adams.
Present.
Councillor Ashton. I think we've got his apologies. Councillor Brewis.
Present.
Councillor Brockway.
Present.
Councillor Grocock.
Present.
Councillor Renshaw.
Present at last.
Present, thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Present.
Councillor Skinner. Councillor Stokes.
Present.
Councillor Strengill.
Present.
And Councillor Whittington.
Present.
Thank you. We will also have Councillor Davies, Executive Councillor for Highways, Transport and IT in attendance, but I don't think he's here yet.
He has sent his apologies. He will be late, Rachel.
Thank you. That's all, Chairman.
Thank you, Rachel. Has anyone not had their name called out who is attending today, please? Right, I'll move on then. I would like to ask members of the committee and other participants to type speak in the chat box when you wish to ask a question or make a contribution, and request to speak will be collated by the Vice Chairman, Councillor Steve Rowe. Please can you keep your questions and contributions succinct and concise. Could I ask if people are not speaking, could they turn the mics off, please? Background noise is very disturbing. Thank you. So again, a timely reminder, please, to turn off your camera and microphone when not participating in the meeting. And I also ask that members who are intending to leave the meeting indicate using the chat function. Officers do not need to do so. We will now move on to the formal agenda. Could I have, Rachel, please, the apologies for absence and replacement members?
Thank you, Chairman. I have apologies from Councillors Ashton and Councillors Mrs Bowkett. We have two replacement members today. Councillor Whittington is replacing Councillor Brooks until further notice, and Councillor Skinner is replacing Mrs Bowkett for this meeting only.
Thank you, Rachel. Can I welcome Councillor Mark Whittington to his, I think it's your first meeting of the Highways and Transport Committee, Mark. Look forward to your valued contributions as we go through the year. Can I move on to item 2, declarations of members' interest? Do any members have any interest to declare other than those in the book of declarations? If so, please type speak in the meeting chat now.
Nobody's signified.
Thank you, Steve. We'll now move on to item 3 on the agenda, minutes of the previous meeting of Highways held on the 20th of July. I don't propose to go through them page by page. But could I ask if any members have any issues to raise on the matter of fact, please, and accuracy of the minutes? Are you all content with the minutes? Thank you. Could I ask for a proposer and seconder, please, that the minutes be approved?
I'm happy to propose, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. We'll now move on to the vote, and you are voting on whether you agree that the minutes are a correct record. I'll now ask Rachel to put out the names of each member. And again, I think for, against or abstain is the required response. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, can I ask that members clearly state if they are voting for, against or abstain when their name is called. Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Brewis.
For.
Councillor Brockway.
For.
Councillor Grocott.
For.
Councillor Renshaw.
For.
Councillor Rowe.
For.
Councillor Stokes.
For.
Councillor Strangill.
For.
Councillor Whittington.
Abstain.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. That's agreed.
Thank you, Rachel. Sorry, I was having trouble with the mute button there. Can we then go on to agenda item 4, please? Announcements by the chairman, executive councillors and lead officers. I have no announcements to make. Councillor Davis has sent his apologies for a delay, so when he arrives, we'll ask him then. I haven't seen Councillor Cleo Herriton-Williams in the meeting. No. So we move on then to lead officers. Karen, any...
Sorry, Chairman, I think Councillor Davies is here now.
Oh, is it? Richard, are you with us? Councillor Davis, could you unmute yourself, please? Okay, are we having a connectivity problem? Can we move on then? I'll ask Karen if she has any announcements to make on behalf of officers, and then...
Apologies, Mr. Chairman, I am here.
Thanks. Thank you, Richard. We're on item 4 then, Richard, announcements by executive councillors. Do you have anything you wish to say to us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's no specific announcement at this stage. However, I would continue to advise the committee that despite the issues in and around COVID, I think the highway service is being delivered well. And I'd like to place on record my thanks to the senior officers, the middle management and the operatives on the ground at the coalface, as it were, for all their continued hard work in what continues to be trying times.
Thank you, Richard. And I think every member of this committee would support and endorse the comments that you've made, and I'm sure that will come through in the subsequent items on the agenda. Thank you, Richard. Is Cleo joining us today? Or is...
She is. I think she's having some connectivity problems at the moment.
Okay. Thank you for that, Richard. Karen, do you have any statements you wish to make at this stage?
No, nothing, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Then we can move on to item 5 on the agenda, the passenger transport update, which is in the hands of Anita Ruffle. And before I call on her, can I say this is one of the most interesting and readable reports that I have seen for a very long time. It was not only informative, but it was also interesting to read and easy to read. And I think it demonstrated very clearly the amazing amount of hard work that goes on behind the scenes that we don't very often see. So we thank you, Anita, and all your colleagues for that. And that really endorses the comments made by Richard about the tremendous amount of hard work that is carried out by officers, very much of it to have some seen and not so. So thank you, Anita, for all that you and your team have done, and now ask you to present the report.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Well, this report basically looks to give an update on passenger transport matters for basically the last sort of 12 months to give you an overview of what's been going on. I think members know that Lincolnshire's transport market is relatively small in terms of providers. We only have one of the large, the big 5, if you like, and even then they don't cover the whole of our county. So we have a number of small and medium-sized independent operators that help to provide our public transport network. I think I'm conscious that this is a very long and detailed report, so what I'll try and do is I'll try and pull out the sort of salient points for you as we go through. In terms of our operators, they're basically made up of sort of two types of operating model, either ones that stick to more traditional bus service provision, and others that actually do sort of closed contracts, coaching, private hire work, etc. Now, I don't think it actually matters which type of operation our operators are running right now, because I think it's fair to say that the impact of COVID has been significant on all of them, and it's put our operators in somewhat of a vulnerable position. And as I go through the report, I'm sure you'll start to see some of the pressures that those operators are facing at the present time. So if we start to look at the bus market during COVID, at the start of the outbreak, numbers started to reduce somewhat. Then obviously we had the national lockdown and we saw an absolute dramatic drop off of passenger transport usage. I think the graph on page 10 helps to sort of illustrate that. If you look at that one, that's the details of pass holders who have a older person's or disabled person's bus pass, and it shows their trip rates between March and the end of May, and you can see that it shows the dramatic drop. We also saw coaching, holidays, day trips, private hire use practically cease overnight because of the need and the requirement to stay at home. The result of that was operators either closing their depots entirely or significantly reducing their activities, and many either furloughed some or all of their staff. Obviously, the message for us during lockdown in relation to public transport was don't travel unless it's absolutely essential, and if you have no other means of making that journey. Fair to say that both government and the local transport authorities have worked really hard to try and provide operators with some support during the crisis, and the table on page 11 gives you a synopsis of the variety of funding schemes that we've put in place over the period. If we look ahead then in terms of the sort of longer term sort of outlook, what we're seeing bus services starting to return to near pre-COVID levels, but unfortunately passenger numbers aren't mirroring that. At the time when I wrote the report, we were looking at about 30%. That number's grown somewhat, but is still way below pre-COVID levels. That's primarily two reasons. One, obviously, people are still a little bit anxious about using public transport, and the other is that there is still a need for social distancing to be adhered to. So that practically reduces the capacity of a vehicle down to about 50%. We obviously have those operators, the ones that are their prime business is around coaching, holidays, day trips, that type of business activity, and they've simply seen mass cancellation of their bookings. And CPT, which is the Confederation of Passenger Transport, have acknowledged that market is unlikely to recover this year and potentially even next. So they've got a real struggle on their hands. And there is a national lobby that's in place to try and get the plight of sort of coach operators recognised, and I think the DFT do recognise that. In addition, the cost of protective measures shouldn't be underestimated. Operators have had to put in PPE, extra cleansing, driver shields, all sorts of measures to try and keep passengers and their staff safe. And in recognition of that, we have agreed to provide a grant to operators to help offset the cost of that PPE and additional cleansing routines. I think in terms of home to school transport, we have historically always sought to put school children on the local bus service. That helps to underpin the local bus routes, but it also helps us to grow the amount of resource that we can call upon to get school children to and from school and college. Unfortunately, although the position has softened in terms of encouraging people to go back to public transport, that isn't the case for scholars. And the advice that we're getting from the government is that we should, wherever possible, look to try and take those children off of the local bus service and put scholars onto dedicated school transport. Obviously, that's been challenging in terms of resource, because as I say, we don't have an abundance of resources within this county. And it also runs the risk of us potentially further undermining the viability of our local bus service. In terms of supported bus services, at the moment, we have around just over 142 supported bus services that the council provides on the basis that operators don't believe they are commercially viable, but we recognise that there is a community need, a sort of social need for those services to be put in place. If we see the commercial bus services undermined and becoming less financially viable, there is a strong likelihood that we will get more calls for us to intervene and to look to put in more supported bus services. So that could have a financial implication. As an authority, we already spend in excess of 5.7 million to support the public transport network within this county. Other impacts on the bus market over the last year, one in particular has come from the Public Service Vehicle Accessibility Regulations, PSVAR for short. Now, these are not new regulations. These have actually been in place for about 20 years, but they phased the measures over a number of years. And there was one due in January this year, and unfortunately it caught a lot of operators out. Operators fell into the trap of thinking that all school services were exempt from these regulations, and that's not the case. If they charge a fare, so they've got fare paying scholars on the bus, or they're carrying, for example, post-16 students who make a contribution, then those services are not exempt. Now, Lincolnshire operators were not alone in falling into that trap. It was a national issue, to the extent that the DFT actually felt they had to intervene, because otherwise we'd have no home to school services operating. So the DFT offered a stopgap, if you like, an exemption for non-compliant vehicles. We applied and we had to get certificates for 262 vehicles operating in the county. And what this does is it gives a little bit of a grace period for operators to get their vehicles into a compliant state. So they need to be wheelchair accessible. So despite PSVAR being about improving accessibility for all passengers, what we're actually seeing is there's been some unintended consequences from this legislation. One is that we in Lincolnshire don't have sufficient vehicles of that type. When you've got an accessible vehicle, it actually reduces the amount of capacity that the number of people you can fit on the vehicle, and that's posing some problems for home to school movements. A second-hand market that lots of operators used to buy from has just disappeared, because those vehicles are now, if they're not wheelchair accessible, basically have no value. So what we are seeing is the newer accessible vehicles having a price premium on those, and that's become costly for some operators. Those that have invested in their vehicles, we're seeing tender prices go up as a result of that, because obviously operators are looking to recoup that investment. And our last tender batch pre-COVID saw an increase of about an average of about 11%. And there are some operators where the cost of a new investing in new vehicles just may be prohibitive, and that obviously gives us some cause for concern. Other challenges come from the Bus Services Act, and I'll go on to that in a few moments. So, it is a real issue that our operators are facing. The Bus Services Act requirements, PSVAR requirements, and all of the measures and issues that COVID brings them. So we're obviously continuing to try and support our operators wherever we can. And one of those examples where we're looking to support has been that over the last year we've actually brought in a scheme for around leasing electronic ticket machines, and so we're leasing them to the operators so that they don't have to have that big financial outlay. Obviously the operators will benefit from this, so will the authority, because it means we get more robust data and allows us to audit more effectively, particularly around sort of concessionary fares payments, for example. We've also offered operators a grant, so where they've already got existing ticket machines, we've offered them a grant to configure those to contactless, and this is to help mitigate against the COVID transmission through handling of money. It would negate the need to handle money. We've also continued to support operators through our bus service operator grant, and that on page 14 you'll see I've listed just some of the initiatives and activities that we use that money on to support public transport. The other thing that we were looking at pre-COVID was around whether or not we could support operators with driver and passenger assistant training, because one of the things that we were finding was there was a growing evidence that operators weren't able to bid for work purely because although they had the vehicle, they didn't have an appropriately qualified driver or, for example, a medically trained PA. Obviously, COVID's got in the way, and we will pick that up in due course once we're clear on what the job market looks like going forwards. Okay, in terms of I mentioned the Bus Services Act. Members will know that I've been trying to keep you abreast of what that means for us as an authority since that legislation was enacted in 2017. There are four key parts to it. One is around franchising, another around giving us powers to do quality bus partnerships if we want to, and another one around allowing us to intervene and to do some more sort of ticketing schemes. All of those three are optional and we don't need to take them up. The fourth strand is mandatory, and that's actually mandatory on the operators. So this is where the challenge is coming in for them. Element of that mandatory requirement is around bus open data. So operators essentially share tables and their routes, etc., with the wider audience and wider public. That became a requirement from January this year, though they have got a sort of 12-month transition period to get that settled in. And they are required to put their data through a portal. That portal's been delayed, and that's not due to now go live until the autumn. but basically all of the operators need to be compliant and using that by December. As an authority, we've offered support to smaller operators to see if there's anything that we can do to help steer them, and if need be, offer a bureau service to actually help deliver on that mandatory requirement. Moving on to sort of public bus service changes. I think nationally, outside of London anyway, the picture is a downward trend for bus service usage, and Lincolnshire is mirroring that national trend. That said, I think it's probably good to just confirm that bus services still account for about 58% of all public transport journeys made in this country, and that includes bus, rail, underground, tram, light rail, etc. Members may remember last time I reported that there'd been significant change and that the network was very unsettled. I'm pleased to say that that's actually not the case at the moment. Those network changes were brought in without, with very few complaints. And pre-COVID, we were seeing a relatively settled network position. On page 16, what I've done, and I won't go through them, but I've traced for you some of the main changes that we've seen in the county over the last 12 months. Next topic I just want to quickly touch on is around community transport, and the big issue for us on community transport during the year has been a judicial review. And essentially, operators brought a case against the UK government in relation to community transport and essentially the regulations that those operators work under. And that's section 19 and 22 permits. The big difference between the two types of operation is that bus operators run under a very tightly regulated framework. Community transport is very much light touch. And the bus operators basically complained that that's not a fair and level playing field, particularly when both parties were bidding for the same types of contracts. The High Court gave a judgment earlier this year. They found in favour of the DfT, and so from that perspective, we don't believe there will be any changes to the 19 and 22 permitting arrangements for community transport, but we will undoubtedly see some further guidance, I think, coming out from the DfT in due course. In terms of our voluntary car schemes during COVID, almost all the schemes ceased. Those that didn't tended to adapt and look to help local initiatives delivering food parcels and the likes. We are now working with those some of those schemes to see if we can try and recruit more volunteers for them, particularly drawing upon the very public-spirited people that we saw within the communities, when they were doing the community efforts during lockdown. We continue to support voluntary car schemes. We give administrative support. We have a forum established which brings schemes together so that they can share best practice and raise issues, etc. And that, obviously those meetings will be resurrected in due course, albeit virtually at the beginning. Just want to mention that the council is still a member of the Public Transport Consortium. That is a scheme or a special interest group arranged through the Local Government Association. We get lots of benefit from that. It's an ideal forum for sort of discussion, sharing best practice. We're able to liaise with government departments and other sort of executive bodies, able to sort of lobby at a high level and get some almost advanced insight into some of the sort of transport policy and operational issues that goes on. We are represented at those meetings by myself and 3 operators from the council. So the intention is that we will continue to be part of that passenger transport consortium. And in fact, our next meeting is on Friday of this week. In terms of total transport activities, we continue to work towards a total transport principle, and that's about sort of sharing our resources. With that in mind, we continue to work with our health colleagues, particularly around the non-emergency passenger transport activities that they commission. That contract is due to come to an end next year. So we are working closely with them to see what joint working we might be able to put in place. And there is certainly some synergy between their non-emergency passenger transport solutions and our Core Connect. So we are looking at that closely and working with them. In terms of bus strategy, I think last time I mentioned that we were looking to review the council's bus strategy because that's been in place for quite some time and needs a refresh. We have stalled on that for the time being, primarily because the government announced earlier this year that it was going to do a national bus strategy. So I think it's important that we see what steer we get from that before we look to refresh our own local strategy arrangements. The final topic, or one of the final topics within the report, is around sustainable transport. I don't intend to go through that because we will be bringing a detailed report to the committee next month around cycling and walking initiatives. But hopefully the report gives you a good idea of just the sheer volume of work that we've done over the year in terms of sustainable transport measures. And the final bit of the report is an appendices, and that's around the group's performance. And it gives lots of interesting facts and figures, etc. So not only does it give performance monitoring, but I hope what it does do is highlight just the breadth of activity that we as a group actually undertake in relation to passenger transport matters. Okay, I'm hoping that was a whirlwind tour of all things public transport and passenger transport for the last year, and I'm happy to take any questions from the floor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Very, very comprehensive, interesting report. Can I go over to Councillor Rowe now to invite those who have indicated they wish to speak?
Thank you, Bob. I have 2 councillors, but first off, Councillor Macy's sent his apologies and asked if they could be noted. And the first councillor asking to speak is Councillor Brewis.
Chris?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank Anita once again for a very thorough report and also a very clear exposition of where we are, which is extremely complex. And I think because it changes from day to day, today's has been extremely useful. I'd also like to thank her and her staff very much for what they do, and also, at least at my end, for keeping me informed when there are significant timetable alterations, because people seem to come to me wanting to know when the buses are coming than anybody else. I'm very grateful for that. I think the really good news was the judicial decision on community transport, because I don't think it's widely understood in city areas just how important community transport is within Lincolnshire in our rural areas, where it's a significant part of our entire fragile network, which is largely kept running efficiently by Anita and her staff. And I think what I'd really like to ask her is there anything we as individuals can do, take this chance to see if there are volunteers who'd like to pick up on community transport, because as she says, there have been initiatives coming and more people might be prepared when this gets a bit easier to take part. And I think that's so important for us that they do, Chairman. So has she got any ideas of what we as individual members can do to assist in that one? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Anita, would you like to respond to that, please?
Okay, thank you. Well, I can advise that we are working with across the sort of service the directorates to try and engage with the volunteers. So obviously we've got details of those volunteers that stepped up during the lockdown. So we have actually got an initiative going now where we are looking to re-engage with those to see if we can do that. So once we've got a little bit further down that line, I think Councillor Brewis will be coming to you to see if even if it's potentially sort of putting up posters, giving contact numbers, we might see that we've got potentially opportunities for some community champions, so that they can be a conduit for the local communities. So I think there are a host of things that we should do. We are planning as well, not only for community transport, for public transport, to do some a series of publicity campaigns, because I think it's important that we get back to promoting the opportunities for people to get out and about within our counties. So there will certainly be plenty that members could do for us. And you did mention about, we keep you informed of any service changes. I would just stress to all members, we put round a monthly update. It's just an outline as to what the changes are within, potentially within your patch. If you've got any queries or want more detail around that, then please just contact us and we can give you War and Peace, as it were, around what those changes are specifically and what that means for your area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita. Steve?
Yeah, and now we have Councillor Renshaw.
Robin?
Thank you, Chairman. I had a bit of an IT problem earlier on, so excuse me not making my notes on paper as well as I might. So I'm just going to go back to the ModGov app, so I hope I don't lose this by doing that. Right, really an excellent report, Anita. You know, the level of detail in that explains a lot of the problems that you're facing in fine detail, and nobody can have any excuse for not knowing what's going on. It's all there, and very pleased to read that. In fact, I read it 2 or 3 times because there's a lot in it, and if we don't read it properly, then as elected members we're going to miss a lot of things. If I may go around 1 or 2 little points. On page 14, it's about the bus stops, installations and repair. I can't find out who's supposed to manage the bus stop installations, because certainly in my division the bus stops are in a disgraceful condition. They are filthy. In fact, the one near to me before lockdown, I have to go there regularly and give it a wash down on a rainy day, and I will continue to do so when we get a bit more rain, because it doesn't encourage people to use the buses. Although because I've been locked down recently, I've not used them personally. So if you could answer that for me, well, at the end it'll be all right. The thing about volunteers is well documented because of taking people to hospital. The cohort that used to actually do that is like myself, an older age group, and a lot of them have been in lockdown, and it is sad. But like a lot of things in this COVID pandemic, there are opportunities, and there will be a workforce available, I think, in the near future. The people that's been on low paid jobs will require, well, on all sorts of jobs, will require employment to keep them busy, and because there are a lot of activities that in my view are currently locked down, and it might be even a couple of years before they're even anywhere near to what it was pre-COVID. So I think that there are opportunities for volunteers there. It's just a matter of encouraging them and training them.
Yes.
Page 15. Yeah, you about the transport operators. It's sad, it's really sad, isn't it? The government bringing legislation and they don't go through legislation and print it all up and get it through Parliament for something to keep the MPs busy. I'm sure they do it because it's in the best interest of us all. And then certain sectors of the community can think that they can ignore it and not bother. And the failure to do so, it reflects on the rest of us. We all pick up the tab for the council tax because we, like your department has got to chase up these people. It's just not good enough, that some people think they can get away with it. But that's a common thread actually during this COVID. And finally, just want to talk on the school children being transported to school. If you've got any data on the number of children that go to school by car, I'd be interested in that. I mean, I know it's hard to quantify, but also just make a comment that I would have concern if I was a parent living in the north of Lincoln about the children that go to SST, because the buses used to be possibly wrongly described in the past as cattle wagons. Well, they're getting to that state now, and there's obviously no social distancing, but the school buses going to an SST are certainly crammed, and I would have concerns. And thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Robin, for that. Anita, are there any matters that you wish to respond to?
Okay, in terms of bus stops, just to say, Councillor Renshaw, that the best person to talk to is from within the highways team if you've got any specific issues around bus stop maintenance, and outside of this meeting I'll get you a contact if that's helpful.
Very useful.
We just from a parish perspective, just so people are aware, we do offer parishes grants to put in bus shelters. So if any of those are in a sort of dilapidated state, it can be either new or sort of remedial works that we'll pay a grant towards. You mentioned briefly the bit about the school transport and no social distancing. Just to stress to everybody, one of the reasons that the government wanted dedicated school transport and taking children off of the normal bus service is that you don't need to social distance on the dedicated school services. So you will see those well loaded up to capacity. We monitor all of the school services practically on a daily basis, so we get details of how many are loaded on those, and if we think there's an overloading issue, then we obviously step in and we'll look to put a duplicate or alternative arrangements in place. In terms of, you asked the question about whether or not we've got details of how many cars are taking children to school. That is at the moment, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? For years we've tried to encourage parents not to do the school run so that it doesn't congest the local area. It doesn't, we've got all the sort of carbon issues. At the moment, the message is very much, if you can take your child to school, do so. And only if you can't, then you look towards the school transport, etc. The government were expecting, and at the moment I haven't got the stats to sort of back this up. The government were expecting broadly a third to sort of walk and cycle and try and make the journey by non-motorised methods. They were expecting about a third for parents taking the children to school, and a third using either the local network or local authority bus provided transport. So it'll be interesting to see how we fare in terms of that statistical assumption, but at the moment it's perhaps early days. A lot of the sites, particularly colleges, etc., are staggering the start dates to try and ease the children back in and not having a mass. So they are staggering start dates, and some of them are staggering start times as well. So it's a bit early for us to have that detail, but we'll try and collate it if we can.
Thank you.
And
Steve, are there any more members wishing to speak?
yes, the final one is Councillor Whittington.
Councillor Whittington. Mark, please.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please send my apologies for not putting a camera on. If I put the camera on, it tends to knock me out, so I tend to just use audio only. Thank Anita for a very, very good informative report. For somebody like me attending their first highways meeting, it really is a fantastic overview of the issues facing public transport in Lincolnshire. Just looking at some of the figures, I see there's in total the government has made available just around about £1.5 million so far to providers in Lincolnshire, and you mentioned that our current spend is 5.7. And it just seems looking at everything that the operators are facing virtually almost a perfect storm of a whole variety of different pressures coming at the same time. First question is, have any of the providers indicated to you or to LCC that potentially they could cease to operate? And bearing in mind that we currently spend 5.7 million ourselves, what potentially could we do as LCC to help them in addition to the government funding they've received? Another point, which again comes out from my involvement on health scrutiny, because you referred to making references to non-emergency patient support, and you're probably aware that we have real issues with the Thames ambulance provider. Is there potentially any scope for us to do more to support that, or even to sort of, I wouldn't say replace Thames, but to sort of do a lot more, or even support Thames? In terms of schools, just some indicative figures. I mean, in Tarrabee, we've had a big issue, obviously, with parents taking their children to school in cars, and the parish council did some surveys about 2 years ago, just measuring the number, because the school in Barrowby is at the end of a road. It's very easy to monitor the traffic flows going through, and the work that the parish council did would indicate that in the morning and the evening, on average, there's between 120 and 140 extra cars that go up that road to the school, in the morning and the afternoon. So it is a real problem. And I guess in an ideal world, we would include children to cycle or walk. But I sometimes have found that when you try to engage with schools to sort of try to get the message out to parents, they don't seem, so I say, a little reluctant. I'm just wondering what we can do to sort of work with schools and teachers and head teachers and parents to try to get the message across. And you mentioned also on the school transport that we're having to potentially put on more services. I'm just wondering if some of the coaching companies who obviously have seen their sort of market crash, where there's an opportunity there for them to maybe pick up some of that slack. And the final point is, I'm delighted that there's a future report coming on sustainable travel, cycling and walking, because I'm currently working with a group of my local residents who want to try to put in a safe cycle path from Tarrabee into Grantham. I'd be obviously interested in that report. But if you've got anything on the Grantham bus and cycle, you could send me beforehand. I'd be much appreciative. And I think that's my list. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Anita.
Thank you, Mark. Anita, would you like to respond to any of those points, please?
Okay, certainly. I think it would probably be wrong to give sort of specifics at this sort of at a public meeting around operators that may have been given an indication whether they could cease to operate. I think the threat is real. I think financially some operators are really going to struggle. They'll struggle when as and when the government's funding is turned off, because that's not going to to obviously be affordable in the longer term. They will struggle when things like their exemption certificates run out. So even if we don't see immediate loss from that sector now, I think we're certainly not out of the woods, and I think there are potentially a number of threats as these sort of key milestones come upon us. What else could we do? One of the things we are doing, as I say, we are looking at doing initiatives to help them, in every way that we can. I think what we might need to look at is the nature of public transport usage going forward. If we are looking, for example, at more disparate trips, and certainly as the health sector start to do their transformation programs, so they're doing lots of change on how health is delivered, that will have an impact on transport requirements. So I think given that things are changing, what we'd look at is to perhaps how bus services are operated. So it may be that we go away from more of the fixed route services and we do more akin to the likes of, say, for example, the Core Connects, where it's demand responsive, so it can be more dynamic. So there's a lot of scope, and I do. It's a challenge, but I see that as an opportunity. So we'll certainly look to rise to that. You mentioned about whether we could do more for helping NEPs and TEMS. It's that very subject that we are having discussions with our health colleagues about. As I say, their contract is up for renewal next year, so we are looking at what scope there is for collaborative working on that front. The walking and cycling, what more can we do? Just to say that we, as an authority, are required to have a smarter modes of transport, travel to schools, which is SMOTS for short. So we've just recently refreshed our SMOTS strategy. And so there is a proposal that we do a lot more walking and cycling. We already do bikeability. It used to be called cycling proficiency in my day. So there's lots of initiatives that we're already doing. But the government's agenda is very much, there is a big push towards cycling and walking. So in terms of not only the grant that we got around COVID, but we have recently received some money for walking and cycling, and particularly cycling initiatives. So we are working with our highways colleagues and our education colleagues to see where we might put in some schemes, school streets, that sort of thing, safer routes to school. So we're doing a joined up approach, and we're looking to see how we can best spend that money to help encourage more cycling and walking for scholars. So watch this space. And in terms of the Grantham and Barraby specifics, yes, Councillor, I'll certainly get, we've got a cycling officer, and I'll get him to separately send you all of the details around what we are proposing within your patch, if that will be helpful.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you, Anita, again. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Anita. Steve, any more contributors?
No, that's it. Everybody's asked the questions.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, members, for your contribution. So we're being requested to consider and comment on any aspects of the report and to highlight the recommendations or further actions for consideration. One or two have come out, and I'm sure Daniel has made a note of them. Sorry, I thought somebody was trying to speak then, I beg your pardon. So the proposal is that the committee receive the report and endorse the work being undertaken on passenger transport in Lincolnshire. I'm happy to propose that. Do I have a seconder, please?
Happy.
Thank you, Chris. I think Chris, Councillor Bruce said he was happy to second. Thank you, Chris. If there are no dissenters, or are there any dissenters? If there are, we go to a formal vote. If they're not, I can say thank you and that it is agreed. Are there any dissenters, please? Please indicate in the chat box.
Nobody,
Steve?
nobody showing.
Thank you very much. In that case, that report is received and agreed with the comments made by members. Thank you for that, Anita, and repeat again, it was an absolutely fascinating report, so easy to read as well, which I think is probably the secret of every report. Thank you very much indeed. And
Thank you, members.
Thank you colleagues as well.
Thank you.
So can we now move on to agenda item 6, please, which is the performance report Q1, and this is in the hands of Paul Ruster. Paul, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So fact to follow them with that report, I'll try and make it as readable and understandable as possible. So you've got this quarter, you got an update on major highway schemes, the Lincolnshire Highways Performance Report, which is the 3 term contracts, and the complaints report. If I start just with the major highway schemes, probably best to have a look at Appendix A, which is about page 49 in your pack. I'll just give you an update on the changes really to, or the interesting elements to the various schemes. Starting with Lincoln Eastern Bypass, we've now completed the Washington Road roundabout, so you'll see that Washington Road is now open. Those of you that live anywhere near Lincoln, it's probably worth going just to have a look at the site, because it's a really interesting view now of just the scale of the works. You can see that we've had to lower the actual Washington Road to make sure we got under the railway bridge, and you can see up through the cuttings as well. So it's a great example of the sort of major civil engineering that's had to take place to build the scheme. We've also completed the final surfacing on all the roundabouts. We've installed the 2 last footbridges, Bloxholm Lane and Greetwell Road, so those are in place now, just finishing some of the abutment work. We've also now completing a lot of the surfacing where we can, and the topsoiling and landscaping, so the scheme's really starting to take shape now. We have got one slight problem which has arisen since I produced this report with the Market Raisin Line bridge, which we're just currently thinking through some solutions for. Move on to Grantham Southern Relief Road. The main issue, or the main interesting points there, I think, are that the bridge beams for the west side of the A1 are all now complete, lifted into place, and the bridge deck pour is completed as well. So that means we can now start to shift the A1 over onto that side and then start work on the eastern side. So there's some overhead shots that we could probably circulate just to show you that, once again, the sort of scale of civil engineering that's taking place. Moving on, Spalding Western Relief Road, we now start to do some of the enabling work. So you'll have seen some of the press reports about the archaeology, some of the things that have been found there. We're also doing some of the vegetation clearance, things like utility diversion preparation, and starting some of the property demolition as well. So there is some progress now on that site. Good progress on the F46 Welton Roundabout. Those of you that have seen there will see a lot of the topsoils being stripped, and we've now started to do a lot of the excavation and some of the construction as well. Rhizome Road Roundabout is making good progress as well. Has been quite a lot of disruption, I think, caused by some of the works. We do our very best to minimise that, and the work should be completed fairly soon, and that obviously will be a big impact on traffic, because we'll have extra capacity at that roundabout. Rugby Club Junction in Sleaford is about complete now. Just another few bits and pieces to finish off, so that once again a good progress on that scheme. We've also started the Corringham Road Junction in Gainsborough. That started a week or so ago. And we've also started the Roman Bank works in Skegness. So that's some major resurfacing to a road that's wanted some sort of serious work doing for quite some time now. So it's good to see that started. I think those are the highlights for the major highway schemes, Chairman. So I'll move on now to the highways performance reports. This is really around the 3 term contracts that we've got. Do you recall that those have all changed over on the 1st of April? So we've got Balfour Beatty for the Highway Works term contract, Colas for the Signals term contract, and WSP for professional services. quite a difficult mobilisation period that we've talked about before, but we didn't stop any works. We carried on delivering works from the very start. We've done quite a lot of work on depot improvements. Those of you that ever visited some of our depots will know that they were in a reasonably dilapidated state in places. So we've completed quite a lot of works now at Willingham Hall, Horncastle and Pode Hall, which will be 3 of the main depots that we'll operate out of, and also the Sleaford site that Balfour Beatty have taken over from Kia. Those works should be completed in the next week or so. So some quite a difficult mobilisation period, and obviously with the impact of coronavirus, the performance figures that you'll see in the report there towards the bottom of page 44 look slightly disappointing in some respects. So highway works term contracts come in at 47%, the professional services at 71%, traffic signals 72%, the client performance indicators at 58%, and the overall Alliance key performance indicators at 71%. There's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, not just the impact of mobilisation and coronavirus, but the fact that we've toughened up a lot of those measures as well. So if you look at some of the detail in the Appendix B, you'll see that there's some really tough performance measures that we put in place. So accepting that the first quarter was slightly disappointing, we've put a range of things in place, particularly around the Balfour Beatty contract. So we've done a series of joint performance workshops to try and make sure that we increase that performance. And I think we're starting to see some of the impact of that now. So I fully expect in the next quarter's performance figures, you'll see an improvement. Just a few highlights then for each of the contract areas. So the highway works term contract, as usual, we've been trying to focus on the condition of carriageways. We've repaired nearly 9,000 potholes in the quarter. Most of those have been driven by routine inspections because during the initial lockdown, obviously people weren't getting out and about, so we weren't getting quite so many public reports. Hopefully the committee will have seen quite an improvement in some of the actual quality of those repairs. We're getting a fairly positive comment, I think, from members of the public about the improvement in quality. There's some of the details there about some of the other works that we've done. So 114 gully grates, quite a number of footway potholes, etc. And at the bottom of the that little section, there's also some detail on some of the other things that we've delivered. So 220 miles of surface dressing, 72 miles of footway improvements, 12 miles of carriageway resurfacing. We've cleaned about 35,000 gullies in the quarter and cut over 16,000 miles of grass. So hopefully the committee will agree that given the circumstances around coronavirus, that's a good performance in terms of the actual work that we've delivered. We're carrying on with community maintenance gangs, so the committee will be aware that that was an additional £3.9 million of work. And these are sort of schemes that don't normally get picked up from our asset management strategy. They're the sort of things that really need doing just to make sure that we're giving the right sort of level of service to members of the public. A lot of those are focused around some of the minor flooding issues that we get, minor handley patching and other repairs. So we've done just over 3,000 individual jobs, and hopefully you'll be starting to see some of the impact of that now locally. Over the page, just pick up a couple of things on the traffic signals term contract. There's a note there, I think, on page 47 about innovation, where Colas were trying to get the rights to manufacture some equipment themselves. They have actually bought out a company called Motus, and they're shifting the manufacturing of some of this equipment to their Grantham depot. So it's a real positive for Lincolnshire that these will be highly skilled jobs. And I say it's actually going to be in Lincolnshire now, so we're really quite pleased about that. Finally, picking up on the complaints report, a really positive report. Complaints have decreased in the last quarter by 50%, and by comparison to the equivalent quarter, they're down by 76%. Some of that will be around the lockdown impact, no doubt, but I think it's also hopefully a demonstration of our improving highway service. The complaints, there weren't actually many of them, but 27% relate to potholes and defects, which is probably to be expected. I think that's it, Chair. I think we've completed the report.
Thank you, Paul, for an equally interesting and comprehensive report. Thank you for that. Steve, are there any members wishing to contribute?
Councillor Renshaw.
Robin, Councillor Renshaw, please.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks, Paul. It's good, excellent report as usual. There's a lot going on, and it's a good feeling that we are achieving something. On page 45, we're talking about the refresh white line. Just a minute. I'm trying to go from a report, Chairman, so you'll bear with me a moment. If I just talk about the gullies first of all, because that's the first thing on my list. This is a big job, and I'm trying to be positive about it. I would like to know how many were not cleansed due to parked vehicles, as the mileage travelled and by the contractor and these costs will be the same as contracted for. Any records of how many times were wandering hoses deployed because of blockages or parked vehicles? The reason is I ask that is that non-cleansing could be a contributory factor in build-ups, which cause serious blockage in systems and flooding, and particularly that we've experienced in Lincoln with about 10 hot spots in the north of Lincoln, and if that's indicative over the county, there's certainly a lot of spots that could be potentially affected by these matters. Non-cleansed gullies, of course, could be obstructed by tree roots, which of course grow in size every year. So lot of problem with those gullies, and to get rid of that. The refreshing the white lines, of course. We haven't done a lot of white. We've done 168 sites of white lines, which, and to me, as somebody who walks around regularly, there's a lot of white lines which are fading, and the problem is, if they're allowed to disappear altogether, then the white lining has to be set out from the start, and that obviously costs more money for the operators than actually just painting over lines that have faded. So if that could be looked at, that would be useful. The I like the idea of wrapping the controller cabinets for these signals cabinets and all these sort of things and asking the schools to come along. That really good community idea, because they are ugly things, these cabinets, and I think sorting them will be very good. Right, my last item is the biggie, and it is about a problem that's manifested itself in my division, and it will happen over everybody's division. So it is an important thing for Highways Committee to consider. Can I have an assurance that in all future major projects will include mitigation measures to prevent unnecessary rat running of HG vehicles in residential areas, to prevent excessive asset damage on unsuitable roads, and take cognizance of important routes near hospitals that require terminally presentations at A&E to prevent loss of life? Saving minutes on the whim of believing social media urban myths makes Route A conditions quicker than Route B require LCC contractors to ensure compliance with our safe routes site policy, as I'm sure it's outlined in planning consents. If this is not a condition in planning consents, then that will explain why LCC gets more complaints than necessary. HGV on suitable routes feature regularly on planning and regulation mineral extraction planning, as you will know, Chairman, because I remember you complaining about a lot of that in Grantham area. I've taken a personal risk, actually, and spoken to drivers who all believe that the routes they save on one against another is essential for for compliance in the driver hours legislation and to comply with the requirements of their tachographs. Unfortunately, this is myth, as I've seen these very same vehicles. They've used a myriad of different routes. So if one is faster, then the other one isn't. And this particular incident emanated from the stone lorries, which bring the stone from Sheffield. Now, normally they would end up joining the Lincoln bypass at Rise Home Roundabout. Sorry, the Car Home Roundabout coming from Sheffield, but they've got a route which comes down Burton Road, goes down Longdales Road, then it turns right into Nettland Road towards the Cathedral, and then goes left down Lee Road, which is a residential area, then across a busy Rugby Road into Queensway, then turns left down Greatwell Road, which is obviously the route to the hospital, and goes right down to the roundabout there. So that's a very convoluted route, but it has caused, with the amount of vehicles, it has caused problems. And I'm sure that that's not the intent when we put in the planning. So if we can have an assurance that that is looked at in future major projects, I'll be very, very, very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Excuse me, before Paul comes back to respond, I fully sympathise and relate to the question of lorries and quarry lorries, etc. Not only have they got the rat runs, they also seem to have comforting numbers now, and 3 or 4 lorries steering through the rural areas at breakneck speed. I'm sort of talking to the Road Safety Partnership to see if anything can be done there, but Paul, white lines and rat running.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'll pick up the issues that Councillor Renshaw raised in the order he raised them. So Gullies, you asked the question about parked cars. Obviously, it is quite a problem for us. Part of the new performance regime is about going back to those areas where they couldn't initially get them cleansed. It's not always easy. I mean, it's one of those things that we're focusing on quite hard now. With part of the community maintenance gangs, I mean, you mentioned about routes blocking drainage runs. I mean, part of our strategy with those is that we've got further drainage gangs who are able to highlight and get to some of those issues that are raised by blocked pipes. So I think collectively we are trying to do as much as we can to get to those known hotspots drainage-wise. Moving on to the lining issue, I think you're right. I mean, we can always do more. If you recall, last year, well, the last 2 years, we've had an extensive programme of renewing centre and edge of carriageway lines, and there's more that we can do, no doubt, with junction markings and other. But we are highlighting those and getting to them as quickly as we can. Cabinets, yeah, that is a good initiative. I think that's been brought in by COLAS, and it's really to try and prevent some of the graffiti that we get on cabinets as well. So would be interesting to see if that gets taken forward. Rat running, it's really difficult for all of our schemes. I think when we close off some of the major roads such as the A17 and whatever, but we do put in quite comprehensive traffic management as a result of that. But you can't always stop some of the rat running that we get. For our actual major schemes, we do a lot of thinking about how and how we actually stop the impact of the construction. So, for instance, the Lincoln Eastern bypass, if you remember, we put the temporary Hall Road bridge in, we put the Bailey Bridge in to prevent all of that internal traffic getting on to the existing highway network. For phase 3 of Grantham, we're putting an internal, or potentially going to put an internal Hall Road in to prevent all that use of the existing highway network. So I think where we can and where we are able to, we put as many measures in as we can to stop the sort of thing that you've described.
Thank you, Paul.
Can I just come back, Chairman?
To contribute.
Chairman, can I just come back?
Yeah, by all means, Robin.
Yeah, just to say that the thing about the white lining issue is serious, because if lines disappear, then it's a danger to all road users, and I think where they are fast disappearing, we need to sort that out, because I'm sure that the Road Safety Partnership would sooner as paint the white lines or renew the white lining than pick up the stats for injuries. And again, I'm more reassured by what Paul said about the rat running. It's obviously a concern for all members across the county, and I think it's something that at the start of each major contract we reinforce it and doubly look at the alternative routes, because the alternative routes are there, but we can't have this attitude where the drivers take it upon themselves. Well, we're not going to use the route that the public have to use to get from A to B. We're going to just go where we like and do respect. And I think what we've done on the LEB to mitigate against these problems is fantastic, and it should be the part of moving forward and improving that every time. So I do appreciate that, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, and for those kind words to Paul. Steve, any other contributors, please?
Yes, Councillor Whittington.
Councillor Whittington, Mark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Paul, for the report. As I say, being my first highways meeting, I found it very, very useful and a very, very good report in terms of the background information. But my first sort of question may seem a little bit frivolous. The Grantham Southern Relief Road, certainly the junction with the A1 and the section down to Spillgate level is within my area, and then Spillgate level is the boundary. In terms of the relief road, I noticed last week there was I think on social media, a post was made of all the archaeology that's been uncovered down there, because the site will go over Saltersford, which was a Roman settlement. In terms of archaeology, and I know this sounds a bit frivolous, when we uncover it, obviously the archaeology department go in. Once they've done their bit, what then happens? Presumably, potentially, a lot of that stuff that's then uncovered, and they've done their work, it will then be submerged under the actual road. I'm just wondering what happens there. So and this is purely out of interest, because I'm got an interest in history and local history. And my second question is really sort of relates to an issue that we've got currently going on at the moment. And you mentioned drainage and some of the problems we have with roads flooding. I've got an ongoing issue. The railway bridge between Allington and Sedgebrook, the road keeps flooding under there. And I've been speaking with Rowan about it, and Paul Brooks as well. And the message they're coming back and saying is that the big issue is the fact that Network Rail, there's an issue with the water coming off the land owned by Network Rail. And I know that both Paul and Rowan have been sort of trying to put pressure on Network Rail to sort of, help to sort the problem out. And I'm just wondering what potentially extra we could do to kind of put a bit more pressure on Network Rail, because Paul did allude to the fact that across the Lincolnshire there are another four or five other sites where there's a similar issue with water coming off, coming off the culverts owned by Network Rail, flooding onto our highways and causing damage. What we can do to get Network Rail to actually engage more, to actually accept that they are part of the solution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mark. Paul, do you wish to respond?
Yeah, certainly. Archaeology, obviously we've got our own fines officers who keep a close eye on the archaeological work that's been taking place. So it'll really depend on what they find and where they perceive it is in relation to this sort of sense of importance for Lincolnshire. So an awful lot of the fines are boxed up and removed for post archaeological review. So we get these reports can take up to a year or more to actually catalogue and write up, and then we'll get a report that comes back from the archaeologists sometime after. A lot of those go to places like the collection. Obviously, things that are not that we aren't able to move, they'll lay down some requirements about what happens to that. So it may be that we have to cover it over to make sure that it's not damaged by road construction. So there's a range, I think, of interventions archaeologically that we put into place. Network rail and drainage issues, you're correct. I mean, it is a major problem for us. It's really difficult with an organisation like Network Rail to get to the people who are able to make some decisions. And it's often a range of different people in an organisation like that you've got to actually get agreement from. I know our teams are working through those particular problems. Once we've got somebody in Network Rail who we actually get some response from, we tend to use them to influence remedial work at other sites as well. But it's always a problem, unfortunately, with Network Rail.
Thank you, Paul. Steve, any more members wishing to speak?
Nobody else wishing to speak.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, thank you, Steve. So we're being invited to consider and comment on the detail of performance contained in the report. That we have done, and recommend any changes or actions to the executive member for highways. I'm quite sure Richard will take back the matter of the issue of the white lines and blocked gullies by parked vehicles when the cleansing work is carried out. I think that probably covers all the major points, and I'm sure Daniel has made a note of any other relevant points. So can I move that we receive and note the performance report? Could I have a seconder, please?
Seconded, Chairman. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Jackie. Are there any dissenters, please? If so, please indicate in the chat box.
Nobody showing, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Then I'll take it that the report is received and agreed. And again, Paul, thank you for keeping it in language that we understand. I think is probably the way to put that. Can we go on to item 7 then, please, on the agenda, which is the winter service plan. Members, we will be asked at the end of this report and debate to have a formal vote. So, Paul, I think you are dealing with this item as well.
I think Matt's probably going to take it. Are you happy to take it, Matt, or do you want me to?
I'm happy to take it, Paul. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. My apologies. It was indicated that Paul might be doing it. But look forward to hearing from you.
That's okay, no problem. So I've undertaken the annual review of the winter service plan, and I've detailed the background of the service and the proposed changes in my report for your consideration. If I could firstly guide you to page 69 of my report, it's the winter service statistics overview from the previous winter. As you're aware, it was a very mild winter, and the precautionary salting turnouts were similar to the previous year, 59, 61 the year before, and nowhere near the severity of 27-18 when there's 122 turnouts. Also, no snow runs this year. That's reflected in the salt usage, with nearly 16,000 tonnes used this year. The network length has remained at 3,008 kilometres for much of the last 10 years, but moving into the up and coming winter, that's expected to increase by 7 kilometres to 3,015 to include the LEB. There are very few changes in the winter service plan that I've put forward to you, particularly in the body of the text. If I could guide you to page 32. And minor changes here basically reflect decisions previously made to move towards treated salt. So 7 depots will now hold treated salt. with 39 gritters with 3 spare, and the one depot with a remainder of the legacy dry salt at Manby will have 4 gritters and 1 spare. That's pretty much all the changes, which I've listed in Appendix D on page 87, contained in the body of the text. So if I could now direct you to page 59. And here you can see the decision-making process for the precautionary salting routes in dry or damp conditions. This is modelled around national guidance from the Winter Service Research Group. And the first change here is to the road surface temperature forecast, which was previously -1 degree, and we're now moving to -2 degrees. The national guidance has actually moved to -4 degrees. So the move here by Lincolnshire is modest, and it will give us the year ahead to measure the effect of that first decision-making criteria at -2 degrees. The changes now to the treatment options, treatment option A, B and C. As we've moved to the treated salt, national guidance and research has shown it adheres to the road surface better. And following that guidance, following the same path as our regional partners, we're reducing the grams per metre square in treatment option A from 10 down to 7 grams per metre squared, sorry. Treatment option B from 15 down to 12. Treatment option C from 20 down to 17. Moving on to the second decision flow chart, which is for wet road conditions. Again, the first intervention of temperatures, road surface treatment, temperature, sorry, has moved from -1 to -2. And the same reduction in grams per metre square of treated salt in treatment options B, C, and D, all reducing by 3 grams per metre square. That is all the changes that we've made to this document. I'm sure there'll be some questions around these temperatures and the reduction in salt. So I'm happy to take those from you.
I don't have any questions.
No questions?
None at all.
Okay. I only assume, Steve, that members are content with the report and are happy to support it, which I'm happy to propose. Could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to propose that. Second it, sorry.
Thank you, Steve. And I think, Rachel, we need to go to a recorded vote, do we?
Yes, we do. Yeah, sorry, Chairman. Yes, we do.
Thank you.
Can I ask that members clearly state if they are voting for, against, or abstaining when I call their name? Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Brewis.
For.
Councillor Brockway.
For.
Councillor Grocott.
For.
Councillor Renshaw.
For.
Councillor Rowe.
For.
Councillor Stokes.
For.
Councillor Strengill.
For.
Councillor Whittington.
For.
Thank you, Chairman. That's all in favour.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, members. We now move on to item 8 on the agenda, Highways and Transport Committee Work Programme. Daniel, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The work programme for the future meetings of the committee is shown on page 104 of the agenda pack. The next meeting is due on the 26th of October, and we do actually have Network Rail attending that meeting, along with some of the train operators and also a representative from the Department for Transport Rail Services. So that's the annual briefing session with our rail partners, and that'll be on the first item on the next agenda. We also have a number of other items that have been mentioned today. Anita mentioned the cycling and walking strategy. There's also the civil parking enforcement annual report listed, and the annual report on the route and place-based transport strategies. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Daniel. Any members got any queries or questions on the future work programme?
I've got a hand up from Councillor Grocott, so I presume he's wanting to ask a question.
Thank you, Steve. Rodney?
Thank you, Chairman. In respect of that email I sent you about the rail services, am I speaking about that at the end of this meeting, Chairman, or is it going to be put on the next meeting when rail are about?
Daniel did say he would get it on the agenda. Is it appropriate to bring that forward, Daniel?
I forwarded the email on to the rail officer, and they've spoken. I believe it'll be best to raise it at the next meeting when rail are present.
Are you happy with that, Rodney?
I'm happy with it, Chairman, but I would also just like to inform the committee about what I was intending to talk about next time, so that they can be aware of it and hopefully agree with me, Chairman.
Will you be sending an email to members of the committee, Rodney? How do you intend to get that across?
I was going to speak today, Chairman, but if that's not possible, then I will just wait until next meeting.
Will you find a methodology of advising members of the points that you wish to raise?
Yeah, what I'll do, Chairman, if this is acceptable, I'll send my points to Daniel, if that's okay. And then
that's absolutely fine. That's fine.
Then Daniel, you'll notify the individual members of the committee, yes?
I will do, yes, that's no problem.
Thank you very much indeed, Daniel. Thank you, Rodney.
Thank you, Chairman.
Any other speakers, please, Steve?
Councillor Renshaw wishes to speak.
Robin?
Thank you, Chairman. You'll be aware I did forewarn you that I would ask that the paper that Richard Fenwick put to flood and water management last time on flooding issues was quite relevant to the work of the Highways and Scrutiny Committee, and I'm sure it would be an eye-opener for everybody. It's an excellent report, and I think it should be considered because it is part of protection of our asset management. And clearly the next meeting is pretty well populated, so later on the one after that will be quite acceptable.
Daniel, do you wish to comment?
Yeah, I've spoken to Karen and to Richard, and that will be added to the 7th meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Rodney. I believe Jackie Brockway is wishing to speak. I saw a hand go up. We do use the chat box.
Yeah,
thank you, Chairman. Yes,
Thank you,
thank you, Chairman. I'm getting a lot of queries. This is for the 26th of October meeting. I'm getting a lot of queries around item 4, public queries about the cycling and walking strategy because of the work being done in Ricehome. And I think it might be worth if Daniel perhaps could alert the officer, Philip Watt, that there are questions. We are putting forward a cycling and walking strategy that residents are finding themselves cut off. Minsterfield's cut off from Nettleham, and Nettleham residents cut off from Nettleham because the increased size and speed, because of our operations, are going to make it too dangerous to cross the bypass. So they are going to ask questions. So it'd be good if the officer could be prepared rather than ask the questions then and then him have to come back at another meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Is it possible for those questions to be notified to the officers well before the meeting, Jackie, do you think?
Yes, Chairman, I can certainly do that myself. Shall I do it directly to the officer?
I think that would be helpful, Jackie. Yes, please. Yep.
Yes, I'll do that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Jackie. Any other contributors, Steve?
No further questions.
Okay. So can I ask formally that the work programme is approved, please? I'm happy to propose that.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Steve.
Agreed.
Any dissenters? Please indicate in the chat box.
Nobody showing.
Thank you, Steve. Then the work programme is agreed. That concludes the business of the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you everyone for your attendance. Now please leave the meeting by using the red phone icon on the end of the bar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Bye.